This is BBC News. I'm Ben Brown. The headlines at 8. A year. In other news this evening, a government compromise amendment on Brexit aimed at avoiding a defeat in the Commons has been described as unacceptable by pro-EU Conservatives. More than 4,500 jobs are to be cut at Rolls-Royce in a major reorganisation aimed at saving hundreds of millions of pounds. Immigration rules are to be relaxed. It's expected that more foreign doctors and nurses will be allowed into the country to help fill NHS vacancies. And also this evening, the most experienced member of the royal family on duty today with the newest member, as the Duchess of Sussex joins the Queen on a visit to Cheshire for their first joint royal engagement. Hello, good evening and welcome to BBC News. 1 year on from the fire that engulfed Grenfell Tower and killed 72 people, special services and a silent vigil have been held today. There was also a 72-second silence at midday to commemorate the dead. At the exact moment that the first emergency call was made to report the fire a year ago, 12:54 in the morning, the tower itself in West London was lit up in green, a colour worn by so many today in honour of all those affected by the tragedy. Well, in the last hour or so, hundreds of people have been taking part in a silent walk around Grenfell Tower and in West London. They've been shaking hands with some of the firefighters who laid down their helmets as a tribute to those who were killed and injured. A silent walk which has happened on the 14th of every month since the disaster, but on this 1 year anniversary, hundreds and hundreds of people taking part, and many of them wearing green. Well, Lucy Manning, our special correspondent, reports now from West London on a day of memories and strong emotions.
It's a complete change. You know, their absence is a big thing that I've been left with, you know, to deal with for the rest of my life, and it's extremely painful, and I miss them daily every day.
Last year, we also met Adel Chowie, desperate for news. He lost his cousin, her husband, their daughter and baby.
On the day of the fire, we were just running around just trying to find our relatives. And, you saw me on the day. But it was the aftermath. And, you know, in the aftermath, this whole community came together.
What do you think the Grenfell community have achieved a year on?
A desire to make sure this never happens again.
At a local church, other families who lost children, parents, sisters and brothers heard calls for healing and justice. They have mourned here as a community, from the day of the fire, supporting each other when those who should have done failed.
In other news, the government's compromise to avoid a Commons defeat on Brexit has been rejected today as unacceptable. Government's Brexit today is unacceptable by leading Remainer Dominic Grieve. Theresa May had convinced most rebels who want MPs to have the final say on the Brexit deal.
Brexit not acceptable. Government both sides on board. Perhaps by disappointing Remainers tonight, she has finally picked one side. But now the lines are drawn for another big showdown when this all comes back to Brexit next week. It is the European Union and the UK that are meant to be having a political divorce through Parliament. But in these last few days, and I think during the time to come, it feels sometimes as if it's the two sides of the Tory party who are truly in these kinds of bitter and dreadful negotiations.
Government.
Have you gone back on your word, Prime Minister? Are rebels right to feel let down?
So, not saying very much about that apparent backtracking on the deal that the Conservative rebels thought they had. Well, another leading Conservative rebel, Anna Soubry, has been expressing her anger at what the government have come up with this evening.
I believed, as many of my colleagues did, that the Prime Minister had agreed to that. So on Tuesday, We didn't push it to a vote. We met the Prime Minister, and the agreement was that Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General, would go and he would negotiate and come up with an amendment to the EU withdrawal bill.
Rolls-Royce is cutting more than 4,500 jobs in a reorganisation. The company says that middle management and office staff posts at its headquarters in Derby are facing many of the cuts over the next couple of years. Our business editor, Simon Jack, reports now from Derby.
At Rolls-Royce headquarters in Derby this lunchtime, workers were tight-lipped about the news of massive job cuts. I don't suppose you'd have a quick word for the BBC, no? No. Could you tell us a little bit about how things are feeling there?
Not feeling well, thank you. Okay. Sorry, we've been asked not to. So.
Been asked not to? No one?
Thank you.
Thank you. But the chief executive was talking about why radical cost-cutting was necessary.
This is a very difficult decision. We're actually trying to create a stronger Rolls-Royce, which is good for Derby and good for the UK, and will provide employment in Derby and other places in the UK for many years to come.
A total of 4,600 jobs are going. That's out of a workforce of 55,000 around the world.
Right, let's get all the latest sport for you. At the BBC Sports Centre, it's Sarah, and the World Cup kicking off in Russia with a great emphatic victory for Russia.
Yeah, Ben, what a start it was for the hosts at the World Cup today. They kicked off the tournament, as you say, in a very impressive fashion, defying their lowly ranking and their recent poor run of form. They ran out 5-0 winners against Saudi Arabia at the Luzhniki Stadium in Moscow. And that scoreline was the biggest win by a host nation in an opening game at the tournament since 1934. And well, before all those goals went in, we also had the opening ceremony to kick off the 21st FIFA World Cup. Adam Wilde reports. So convincing win and start to the tournament for the hosts. But how much did we really learn about them? Conor McNamara was commentating on the game for BBC Radio 5 Live.
More doctors and nurses are being trained in the UK, but that will take time. And beyond the need to fill gaps in the health service, is this relaxation of the rules more than just a possible quick fix?
I think there's a total change in approach with Sajid Javid and the Prime Minister. Without her approval, none of this would be happening. And I think that it is a point to get across that just because we're leaving the European Union, it doesn't mean that we're anti-immigration. We're not. We have to be flexible.
We're told the Prime Minister is enthusiastic about this plan to fill staffing gaps in the NHS short term. What's much less clear is how far this move reflects any broader shift in government policy on immigration and what its long-term plan might be. Jonathan Blake, BBC News, Westminster.
Older people are ending up in hospital as a direct result of cuts to social care spending in England. That's according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. They estimate that a drop council in spending over recent years has led to one additional visit to accident and emergency for every 10 people aged 65 and over. Well, in the final part of our series looking at the difficulties faced by those needing care and those providing it, our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt has been to Lancashire.
Accident and emergency is the front door of pressure for the health service, the place where more people are turning in a crisis. Many are elderly.
The doctor's got to give us the all clear for you see.
And that has a knock-on effect on the whole hospital, as they know well at the Royal Blackburn in Lancashire.
Here they have an ambulance arriving on average every 9 minutes. It's a sign of the sheer pressure the system is under.
We are seeing a rise in the numbers, and a typical day across our emergency department and urgent care centres will see 550, 600 people a day.
The demand for hospital beds is constant. To ease the pressure, effort is going into providing the support patients need to recuperate at home. Like 72-year-old John Mellor, whose bag is packed ready for him to leave. He's been in hospital for nearly 9 days after a stroke.
If we need to put any services in, they are there. You'll be able to make yourself a cup of tea and a cake and you'll be fine and dandy at home.
Far better, I think, going home to somewhere where you know where everything is and, you know, you can work better that way, your mind works better.
How were you managing at home? I can manage so far.
With council social workers and NHS specialists working together, they're doing well at preventing people becoming stuck in hospital. The team heads to see an elderly man who's been admitted several times. There's the possibility of dementia.
You hang on here. Let us just go and make these phone calls and have a conversation. We'll come back to you.
They think his family's struggling and more help at home might have stopped him coming in the first place.
We plan with our mental health colleagues to get a plan that will be able to keep him home safely and ensure that he stays at home rather than come back.
Staff are arriving for a meeting with the head of Lancashire's care services.
Makes a real difference to the people who live in this area in East Lancashire.
It's to praise them for the work they're doing, but like most council bosses, he worries about how he's going to find the long-term money needed to meet the growing demand for services before people reach a crisis.
I think it's constant pressures all the time, really.
We can't simply go faster and faster on the current model. We know we've got to do a lot more in order to staunch some of the flow into the hospital and make sure we're supporting people more effectively in the community.
Right.
Pressures being felt across the care system, as we've seen firsthand this week.
We are absolutely in crisis at this point.
The costs for those who pay for themselves.
I hope I don't live to be 100, but by then I'll be broke.
And the frustrations of those who provide the care.
People just look at you and think, well, you're a care worker. You just wipe bums.
The government promises a green paper will set out plans to reform the care system this summer. But what of the difficulties people face now?
Isn't this a crisis?
It's certainly a situation under a lot of pressure. We can't afford to play party political games with this anymore. We have to address this situation. The quality of people's lives depends upon this.
Lots of talk about more money for the NHS on its 70th birthday. Will there be more money for the care system at the same time?
We need more money for the care system because
we need it. Will it come at the same time?
Well, you'll have to wait and see what comes out in the green paper. But if we address the funding issues of the NHS without addressing social care issues, it's like running a bath with the plug out.
And those we've met who either need care or who provide it will be waiting to see what that means for them. Alison Holt, BBC News.
The time's just approaching 8:30. We're going to look at the weather prospects now with Louise Lear.